You're nothing but a glorified mop pusher, Marcus. Did you really think you could stand in the way of progress? Rebecca sneered, her voice dripping with venom. Her designer heels clicked aggressively against the cold marble of the courtroom, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. By tomorrow, you'll be rotting in a concrete cell, and that pathetic little house you cling to will be nothing but dust under my bulldozers. Marcus stared down at his chained hands. The heavy steel bit into his frail wrists, his spirit finally breaking under the weight of a billionaire's manufactured lies. I just wanted to protect my girls, he whispered, a tear slipping down his weathered cheek. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the courtroom blasted open with a deafening crack. Three women in impeccably tailored suits strode down the center aisle, their presence commanding the entire room. "You step away from our father," the lead attorney snapped, her voice echoing like thunder and freezing the smug smile right off Rebecca's face. "Or we will take everything you own." The rain fell in freezing horizontal sheets over Chicago's south side, washing the grit of the city into the gutters, but it couldn't wash away the acrid, suffocating smell of smoke. It was a bleak, unforgiving November night in 2004. Marcus Ellison, a 38-year-old night shift janitor at Lincoln Park High School, was trudging up the cracked concrete steps to his apartment building. His muscles ached with the familiar bone-deep exhaustion of a 14-hour shift. His hands, perpetually calloused and stinging from cheap industrial bleach, fumbled blindly for his keys in the dark. But as he finally looked up, the flashing red and blue lights of emergency vehicles painted the wet brick facade in a horrifying, chaotic strobe. The second-floor apartment, the one directly above his, was a blackened, hollowed-out shell, smoke still billowing from the shattered window frames like a dark omen. Marcus dropped his metal lunch pail, the clatter lost in the roar of the fire engines. He knew that apartment intimately. It belonged to the Hayes family. David and Sarah Hayes were kind, hard-working people. David had fixed Marcus's radiator just last month, refusing any payment, and they occasionally shared a Sunday roast with the quiet, solitary janitor downstairs. More importantly, they were the devoted parents of three beautiful little girls. 6-year-old Maya, 4-year-old Elena, and 2-year-old Chloe. Pushing frantically past the yellow police tape and the shouts of the officers, Marcus found the three children sitting on the lowered tailgate of an ambulance. They were wrapped tightly in crinkling foil thermal blankets. Maya was clutching her little sisters fiercely to her chest, rocking them back and forth. Her small face was heavily smudged with black soot, her eyes wide with the silent, paralyzing terror that no child should ever know. A weary paramedic was talking to a police officer a few feet away, shaking his head grimly. "The parents didn't make it," the paramedic muttered, pulling off his gloves. "Carbon monoxide inhalation. The smoke got them in their sleep. The kids only survived because the father managed to smash their bedroom window with a lamp before he collapsed in the hallway." Marcus felt the breath violently leave his lungs, his knees threatening to buckle. He approached the girls slowly, kneeling right into the freezing puddles on the asphalt. Maya looked down at him, her little chin trembling uncontrollably. "Mr. Marcus," she whispered, her voice barely a scratch, "Mommy won't wake up." They won't let us see her. The next morning, the stark fluorescent lit halls of the Cook County Department of Family Services were a miserable symphony of crying children, ringing phones, and desperate arguments. Marcus hadn't slept a wink. He had stayed with the girls all night, buying them terrible vending machine hot chocolate and singing softly to keep the nightmares at bay. They were waiting for their only living relative on record, Sarah's wealthy older sister, Rebecca Sloan. When Rebecca finally arrived 3 hours late, the temperature in the cramped waiting room seemed to plummet to absolute zero. She didn't come rushing in with tears streaming down her face or open arms ready to comfort her traumatized nieces. Instead, she glided through the scuffed double doors wearing a pristine tailored Armani suit, flanked by a silent man clutching a sleek leather briefcase. She looked at the three soot-stained, exhausted little girls with a mixture of profound annoyance and utter undisguised disgust. "This is completely unacceptable," Rebecca clipped, her voice sharp as glass, speaking directly to the exasperated social worker and ignoring the children entirely. "I am in the middle of closing a multi-million-dollar corporate merger. I cannot be saddled with 3 dependents on a moment's notice. My sister made her choices, choosing that pathetic, poverty-stricken life over the family business. I warned her. I am not taking them." "Ma'am, they are your nieces. They have just lost everything," the social worker pleaded, rubbing her temples. "If you refuse guardianship, they go directly into the state foster system. Given their ages, they will almost certainly be separated into different homes by the end of the week." Rebecca casually adjusted her heavy diamond earrings, her face a mask of aristocratic stone. "Then, separate them. That is the state's problem, not mine. The inheritance my father left was strictly divided." With Sarah gone, her half defaults entirely to me. I am not spending a single dime of my capital on this baggage. She didn't even flinch. She simply leaned over the desk, signed a piece of paper, severing her blood ties with a ruthless stroke of a gold fountain pen, and turned on her heel to leave. As she walked out, Marcus felt a blinding fire ignite in his chest, hot enough to rival the blaze from the night before. He watched Maya pull Elena and Chloe closer, the horrific reality of their total abandonment settling over her tiny shoulders. Marcus was a man who scrubbed vomit off locker room floors for minimum wage. He lived in a cramped, drafty two-bedroom apartment that barely had reliable hot water. He had absolutely nothing to his name. But as he looked at those three innocent faces staring at the door their aunt had just walked out of, he knew with absolute certainty he had enough love to fill the massive, gaping void that monster had left behind. "Wait," Marcus said, his deep, gravelly voice stopping the social worker before she could pick up her phone to call child services. "I'll take them." The social worker looked at him skeptically, her eyes scanning his worn flannel shirt and faded work boots. "Mr. Ellison, please be realistic. You are a single man. You're a high school janitor. Fostering three traumatized children is a monumental financial and emotional burden. The state stipend barely covers groceries. They ain't a burden," Marcus said firmly, stepping solidly between the huddled girls and the office door, acting as a human shield against the cold world. "They're family now. Tell me what I need to sign to take my girls home." The next 2 decades were a relentless, grueling crucible of pure sacrifice. Marcus Ellison did not just casually raise Maya, Elena, and Chloe. He poured the very marrow of his bones, the sweat of his brow, and every ounce of his energy into forging their futures. To feed three rapidly growing girls and afford their ever-changing clothes, endless school supplies, and inevitable medical bills, Marcus took on a second job and eventually a third. He worked his regular back-breaking shift at the high school, spent his weekends deep cleaning greasy commercial kitchens until his knuckles bled, and took early morning routes delivering the Chicago Tribune before the sun even thought about rising. His entire life became a dizzying blur of swinging mops, alarms ringing me silently at 3 a.m., and the pervasive smell of cheap ramen noodles mixed with industrial pine-scented floor cleaner. He skipped meals so they could have seconds. He wore shoes with holes in the soles so they could have new winter boots, but his home, despite its peeling wallpaper and rattling pipes, was a fortress of fierce, unwavering, protective love. The cramped apartment was always warm with laughter. Marcus patiently learned to braid hair, clumsily but lovingly weaving bright ribbons into Chloe's thick curls with his large, rough, chemical-stained hands. He sat at the tiny, wobbly kitchen table every single night, squinting through dollar store reading glasses, painstakingly helping Maya untangle her algebra homework and listening intently to Elena recite complex historical dates until she had them memorized perfectly. He instilled in them a work ethic forged in absolute iron. The world out there is going to look at your address, look at the clothes on your back, and try to tell you who you are, Marcus would say, his heavy, warm hands resting securely on their shoulders. You look them right in the eye and tell them they're dead wrong. You write your own story with your brains, your integrity, and your character. Nobody can take your mind away from you. And write it they did, with a vengeance. Maya, the eldest, channeled her early trauma and the memory of her aunt's betrayal into a fierce, unyielding desire for justice. She studied tirelessly under the dim, flickering bulb of Marcus's supply closet after school, devouring old, discarded law books she scrounged from the public library. Elena developed a brilliant, almost terrifyingly analytical mind. Where others saw chaos, she found profound comfort in the absolute, undeniable truths of mathematics and high-level finance, mapping out the family's meager grocery budget by age 10. Chloe, the youngest and most quietly observant, grew up analyzing the neighborhood, always searching for the hidden truth beneath the surface, writing scathing investigative reports on the corrupt local landlord before she was even in high school. Their successes were Marcus's sole sustaining reward. When Maya won a highly coveted full-ride scholarship to Harvard Law, Marcus wept openly in the folding chairs of the auditorium, his worn, oversized suit hanging off his drastically thinning frame, not caring who saw his tears. When Elena graduated summa laude from Wharton with a specialized degree in forensic accounting, Marcus quietly pawned his only valuable possession in the world, his late grandfather's solid gold pocket watch, just to buy her the high-powered laptop she needed for her new career. When Chloe secured a fiercely competitive investigative journalism fellowship in D.C., Marcus framed her very first published article in a cheap plastic frame and hung it right next to the front door, tapping it proudly every time he walked in. By 2024, Marcus Clear's throat was 60 years old. His body was a living, breathing map of his decades of sacrifice. He suffered from severe, agonizing arthritis in his hands. His knees were completely giving out from years of kneeling on hard tile, and he walked with a slow, pronounced limp. But his girls were out in the world, untouchable, powerful, and utterly safe. Maya was a feared rising star at a cutthroat corporate litigation firm in New York. Elena was a senior financial investigator for the federal government tracking international crime rings. Chloe was making a massive name for herself, relentlessly exposing political corruption on the East Coast. Marcus had finally, mercifully, allowed himself to slow down. He bought a small, humble, single-story house in a quiet, tight-knit, working-class neighborhood in Brownsville, planning to spend his hard-earned twilight years tending to his small backyard vegetable garden, reading the paper, and resting his weary bones on the porch. He didn't know that the monstrous ghosts of 2004 were about to kick his front door off its hinges. Rebecca Sloan had not spent the last 20 years sitting idle either. She had taken the entirety of the inheritance she had ruthlessly stolen from her dead sister and her orphaned nieces and used it as the seed money to build an absolute empire of concrete and greed. Sloan Enterprises was now a multi-billion-dollar real estate development behemoth notorious across the Midwest for ruthless, aggressive gentrification, buying off city council members and bulldozing vibrant, low-income neighborhoods to build soulless luxury high-rises for the ultra-wealthy. Rebecca was a fixture in Chicago high society, a woman whose heart was as cold, hard, and unforgiving as the reflective glass towers she built to scratch the sky. Her latest, most ambitious project, the Sapphire Spire, was a massive, sprawling commercial and residential complex designed to completely dominate the Southside skyline. There was only one glaring problem holding up her $100 million payday. The massive footprint of her mega development required the absolute total demolition of an entire residential block in Bronzeville. Using her standard playbook of intimidation, she had successfully bullied, aggressively bought out, or legally threatened every single homeowner on the block into packing up and leaving, except for one stubborn, aging former janitor sitting smack at the very center of the grid, Marcus Ellison. Marcus had politely but firmly refused her slick corporate stooges time and time again. This house is the very first thing I've ever truly owned in my whole life, he told the aggressive men in expensive suits who kept pounding on his door. My girls grew up poor, but they have a room right here waiting for them whenever they want to come home to their dad. The memories are in these walls. It's not for sale, not for any price. When the news of this lone holdout finally reached Rebecca's sprawling minimalist penthouse office, she was livid. She didn't recognize Marcus's name on the property deed. To her, he was just a nameless, faceless peasant stubbornly standing in the way of her legacy. "If the old fool won't take the carrot," Rebecca sneered to her team of fixers, casually pouring a glass of $1,000 scotch and looking down at the city like it was her personal chessboard, "then beat him to death with the stick. I want him ruined. I want him begging to leave." Rebecca was a dark master of corporate warfare, and she deployed her illegal, shadowy arts with terrifying speed and precision. She used her immense wealth and deep underworld connections to orchestrate a dizzyingly complex, devastating frame-up. Using untraceable dark money, her fixers meticulously set up a fraudulent shell charity called the Bronzeville Orphan Fund. They expertly forged Marcus's signature on hundreds of digital and physical documents, lifting his actual signature from a neighborhood petition he had genuinely signed months earlier to get the city to fix a local playground, and legally listed him as the primary director and sole beneficiary of the fund. Over the next 3 agonizing months, Sloan Enterprises secretly funneled $15 million of illicit, untaxed corporate money through the fake charity, immediately draining it out into heavily encrypted offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. They deliberately left a digital trail of breadcrumbs so obvious, glaring, and damning that a first-year accounting student could follow it, Clear's throat, right back to Marcus's front door. It was a classic, flawless embezzlement framing. Then, acting as an anonymous concerned citizen, they tipped off the federal authorities. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning. Marcus was peacefully watering his heirloom tomatoes, enjoying the morning sun, when 3 armored black SUVs tore over his front curb, ripping up the lawn. Heavily armed FBI agents in tactical gear swarmed his property, shouting overlapping orders, kicking in his screen door, and violently tackling the frail, bewildered old man face first into the dirt of his own garden. They tore his house apart down to the studs, triumphantly finding carefully planted fake ledgers in his crawl space and a burner laptop he had never seen before hidden under his mattress. The local news networks had an absolute field day with the sensational story. Beloved local janitor accused of funneling $15 million from orphan charity. The chyron screamed across every channel in the city. The narrative the media spun was devastating and instant. Marcus was denied bail entirely, deemed a massive flight risk due to the sheer staggering amount of missing money, and thrown into a freezing maximum security cell at the notorious Cook County Jail. Sitting alone in the cold, windowless concrete box, dressed in an oversized, scratchy orange jumpsuit, Marcus felt a crushing, suffocating despair he hadn't known since the night he watched the Hayes' apartment burn in 2004. He was facing 30 years in federal prison. 30 years to a 60-year-old man with bad knees was a guaranteed death sentence. He had absolutely no money for a high-powered defense lawyer. The exhausted, overworked public defender took one look at the mountain of manufactured evidence and immediately told him to plead guilty to secure a slightly lighter sentence in a lower security facility. "They have ironclad paper trails, Mr. Ellison," the public defender sighed, rubbing his tired eyes in the sterile consultation room. "They have ISP logs tracing the massive transfers right back to your home router. It's a slam dunk for the feds. You're going to die in a cage if we try to fight this in front of a jury." Marcus put his heavy head in his hands, hot tears slipping through his rough, permanently scarred fingers, dripping onto the steel table. He thought of his brilliant, beautiful girls he had worked his entire miserable life so they wouldn't have to suffer the indignity of poverty. And now, after all of it, he was going to die a publicly disgraced, reviled convict. He would ruin their pristine reputations. "I'm innocent," he croaked, his voice cracking, though he knew nobody in the system was listening. Then the heavy reinforced steel door of the visitation room suddenly clanged open. Marcus didn't even look up until he heard the sharp, authoritative, rhythmic click of very expensive heels striking the concrete floor, a sound that in a prison usually meant serious trouble. But as he slowly, defeatedly raised his head, his tired, red-rimmed eyes widened in absolute disbelief. Standing right in the doorway, blocking out the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway, was Maya. She wasn't the little girl in the soot-stained blanket anymore. She was wearing a perfectly tailored $5,000 charcoal power suit, her leather litigation briefcase gripped tightly in her hand like a weapon. Directly behind her stood Elena, her eyes scanning the dingy room with the cold, calculating, terrifying precision of a sniper, holding a thick stack of color-coded manila folders tightly against her chest. And leaning against the doorframe behind her was Chloe, holding a digital voice recorder and a legal notepad, her jaw set in a look of absolute, unadulterated fury. Marcus immediately burst into fresh tears, his chair scraping loudly as he tried to stand up, but the heavy iron chains on his wrist caught the metal table, jerking him painfully back down. "Girls, oh God, what are you doing here? You shouldn't see me like this. You have to go back to your lives. You can't be associated with this." Maya stepped forward instantly, slamming her heavy briefcase onto the metal table with a sound like a literal gunshot, making the public defender physically jump. She reached out, completely ignoring prison protocol, and took his chained, calloused hands in both of hers, pressing her forehead to his knuckles. "Dad," Maya said, her voice shaking with profound emotion but laced with pure unbreakable steel. "You spent 20 years of your life fighting for us. You broke your back and ruined your hands so we could fly. You think we're going to let some corporate vulture put you in a cage? No. It's our turn to fight for you." "Maya," the public defender stammered, his eyes bulging as he recognized her from a massive, recent, high-profile Wall Street Journal feature on the country's most ruthless litigators. "Ms. Hayes, what is your involvement here?" "My involvement," Maya said, slowly turning her piercing, predatory gaze on the terrified, out-of-his-depth lawyer, "is that you are officially fired, effective Clear's throat this exact second. I am formally taking over as lead counsel for Marcus Ellison. My sister Elena is acting as the defense's chief forensic accountant, and Chloe is handling the entire press and media strategy. We are his legal team now." The public defender frantically scrambled to gather his scattered papers into his cheap briefcase. Miss Hayes, you don't understand. The evidence is airtight. The prosecution has a literal mountain of it. Elena stepped forward into the harsh light, pushing her glasses up her nose with a clinical detachment. It's not a mountain. It's a pathetic house of cards built by sloppy amateurs who think they can outsmart federal algorithms. I've spent the last 48 hours doing a deep dive layer 7 packet inspection on the routing numbers and the Cayman Islands shell companies they used. The 15 million didn't just vanish into thin air. I know exactly where every single cent went. Chloe leaned lazily against the concrete wall, a highly dangerous wolfish smile playing on her lips. And I've spent the weekend digging deep into the corporate registry of the anonymous firm that supposedly tipped off the FBI. They tried to hide it, but guess whose name is buried beneath 4 layers of dummy LLCs in Delaware? Marcus looked back and forth between his brilliant daughters, completely bewildered. Who would do this to me? Sloan Enterprises, Maya said, the name dripping from her lips with absolute venom. Rebecca Sloan. Marcus gasped, all the air leaving his lungs. The ghost from 2004, the monster, the woman who had looked at 3 orphan toddlers whose parents had just burned to death and thrown them away like garbage just to keep a few extra $1 million of inheritance. She hadn't recognized Marcus's name on the deed of the Bronxville house because she had never cared to learn it. To her, he was just a peasant in the way of a bulldozer. She has absolutely no idea who we are, Dad, Elena murmured, her eyes dark and full of promises of ruin. We legally changed our last names to Ellison the very second we turned 18. To Rebecca Sloan, Marcus Ellison is just a random squatter holding up her payday, and Maya Ellison is just some bleeding heart pro bono defense attorney taking a charity case. Maya snapped her briefcase open, pulling out a fresh yellow legal pad. The stale air in the cramped room seemed to literally crackle with high-voltage electricity. The 3 discarded orphan girls who had been tossed into the street 20 years ago were now apex predators in their respective cutthroat fields. And the arrogant woman who abandoned them had just made the single biggest, most catastrophic mistake of her life. She had attacked the man who became their father. We don't just want a simple acquittal, Maya, Chloe said, her voice dropping into a low, predatory growl. I know, Maya replied, clicking her heavy silver pen with finality. We're not just going to prove his innocence. We are going to rip Rebecca Sloan's entire multi-billion-dollar empire apart, brick by bloody brick, and we are going to do it in front of the whole damn world. The media circus outside the Cook County Circuit Court was deafening and chaotic. Satellite news vans lined the blocked-off streets, and aggressive reporters shoved microphones and flashing cameras in the faces of anyone entering the towering stone building. Inside the massive wood-paneled courtroom 302, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense, the air thick with anticipation. Judge Harrison, a notoriously strict, no-nonsense veteran of the bench, banged his wooden gavel to silence the murmuring gallery. The prosecution, led by a smug, overly confident district attorney who clearly saw this high-profile case as an easy stepping stone to the mayor's office, laid out a devastating theatrical narrative. For 2 days, they presented the forged bank documents, the spoofed IP logs, and the fabricated witness statements. They painted Marcus as a greedy, sociopathic mastermind who had cynically used his humble, grandfatherly janitor persona as an emotional shield to steal millions from the city's most vulnerable orphans. Marcus sat rigidly at the heavy oak defense table in a crisp, perfectly tailored, clean suit bought by his daughters. He looked terrified, his hands visibly trembling, refusing to make eye contact as the jury glared at him with open disgust and contempt. But Maya sat perfectly, statuesquely still next to him. She didn't object a single time. She didn't interrupt the DA's grandstanding. She patiently let the prosecution build Rebecca Sloan's elaborate lie as tall and proud as possible, knowing perfectly well that the taller the structure, the harder and more devastating the fall would be. On the morning of the 3rd day, the prosecution triumphantly called their star witness, Rebecca Sloan. Rebecca strode into the courtroom looking like a reigning queen surveying her conquered kingdom. She wore a pristine, blindingly white designer suit looking the absolute picture of civic virtue and corporate responsibility. She took the oath confidently, her manicured hand resting gracefully on the Bible, flashing a sympathetic smile to the jury box. Ms. Sloan, the DA asked, his tone dripping with unearned respect. How exactly did you, a busy CEO, become aware of this massive, heartbreaking fraud? Rebecca sighed softly, a perfectly manufactured, award-winning expression of deep sorrow washing over her face. As a major real estate developer, I am deeply, personally invested in the health of the Brownsville community. My outreach team was doing routine community wellness checks when we noticed glaring, undeniable financial irregularities in the local orphan fund. We privately hired independent auditors at our own expense, and we were simply heartbroken to discover that Mr. Ellison, a man this community deeply trusted, was ruthlessly draining millions of dollars intended for children. Or she looked directly at the jury, her eyes actually shining with practiced fake tears. It is absolutely despicable to steal in the very name of orphans. I simply had no choice but to bring it to the federal authorities. It was my moral duty. A low, angry murmur of outrage rippled through the packed gallery. The DA smiled proudly and sat down. Your witness, counselor. Good luck. Maya stood up slowly, deliberately taking her time. She calmly buttoned her suit jacket, picked up a single thin manila folder from the table, and walked out from behind the defense desk to stand directly at the podium. The entire courtroom seemed to collectively hold its breath. Ms. Sloan, Maya began, her voice incredibly calm, hyper-respectful, yet echoing with a terrifying hidden edge that made the judge lean forward slightly. You paint a very compelling picture of a deeply charitable woman, a woman who cares intensely and personally for orphans. Is that correct? Rebecca smiled benevolently, completely unaware of the trap. I firmly believe those who have been blessed with immense financial success have a strict moral obligation to protect the vulnerable in our society. Fascinating philosophy, Maya said, abandoning the podium and beginning to pace slowly, methodically before the jury box like a shark circling a wounded seal. Let's talk about the exact origins of that moral obligation. You are the sole CEO of Sloan Enterprises, a corporate empire currently valued at roughly $1.2 billion. Can you tell this court under oath exactly how you acquired the massive initial seed capital required for your very first major development in 2005? The DA shot up from his chair. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. The defendant's personal financial history from 2 decades ago has absolutely nothing to do with Mr. Ellison's current embezzlement charges. Your Honor, Maya countered smoothly, not breaking eye contact with the judge. The prosecution spent an hour establishing Miss Sloan's core character as a benevolent protector of the community. I have the constitutional right to cross-examine the absolute foundation of that character, especially since it relates directly to the flow of the very funds my client is accused of stealing. Judge Harrison frowned deeply, intrigued. He looked at Maya, then at the suddenly rigid witness. I'll allow it, but tread very carefully, counselor. Answer the question, Mrs. Sloan. Rebecca's benevolent smile tightened just a fraction of an inch. I utilized personal family inheritance. Inheritance? Maya repeated, letting the heavy word hang in the dead air of the room. Specifically, an estate worth exactly $8 million left by your late father. An estate that was, by your father's explicit will, meant to be split evenly between you and your younger sister, Sarah Hayes. But Sarah died tragically in an apartment fire in 2004, didn't she? Rebecca's eyes narrowed dangerously. The facade of benevolence was actively cracking. Yes, it was a horrific tragedy. I don't see how... And Sarah left behind 3 little girls, Maya continued, her voice suddenly rising in volume, the crushing emotional gravity of 20 years of struggle bleeding into her sharp words. Maya, Elena, and Chloe. By the absolute letter of the law, Sarah's half of the inheritance, $4 million, belonged in a locked trust for those 3 orphan toddlers. Yet public court records show you selfishly signed away your legal guardianship rights to the state, falsely claimed the girls were lost to the foster system, and illegally absorbed the entirety of the estate to fund your first luxury high-rise. Objection inflammatory, the DA roared, his face turning red. Overruled, the judge snapped instantly, suddenly leaning far over his bench, his eyes locked intensely on Rebecca. The witness will answer. Rebecca gripped the wooden edges of the witness stand so hard her knuckles turned stark white. Her composed face contorted into an ugly snarl. This is an ambush. This is outrageous slander. I made difficult, necessary business choices. This ancient history has absolutely nothing to do with that pathetic janitor stealing money. Maya closed the distance, stepping right up to the wooden railing of the witness stand, her dark eyes burning with the fire of 1,000 unpaid debts, glaring down at the woman who had thrown her away. It has everything to do with it, Rebecca, Maya whispered, her voice low, but carrying clearly through the microphone to every corner of the stunned room. Because you didn't just frame a janitor to steal his land, you framed the man who picked up the garbage you left behind. Total paralyzing confusion rippled through the courtroom. Rebecca stared wide-eyed at the brilliant, ferocious attorney standing inches from her face. She looked at the sharp, uncompromising jawline, the piercing brown eyes. Then she looked frantically over at the defense table. She saw Elena furiously typing complex code on a laptop, her face an exact, terrifying mirror image of her late sister, Sarah Hayes. She saw Chloe sitting confidently in the front row of the gallery, glaring at her with a terrifying, predatory intensity, holding a voice recorder. The color completely and instantly drained from Rebecca Sloane's face as the horrific realization hit her system like a physical, crippling blow. "Maya?" Rebecca breathed, her voice trembling, the microphone catching the raw, panicked whisper and projecting it to the jury. "Yes, Aunt Rebecca," Maya said, her voice echoing in the dead silent, spellbound courtroom, clear as throat. "It's Maya and Elena and Chloe. The baggage you abandoned in that waiting room, we didn't get lost in the system like you hoped. Marcus Ellison took us in. He worked 3 jobs, ruined his hands with bleach, and literally broke his back to give us the life you stole from us. And now you tried to steal his life too, big mistake." The gallery absolutely erupted. Reporters scrambled over each other shouting. The judge banged his gavel furiously, his face flushed. "Order! I will have order in this court or I will clear the room." Maya didn't miss a single beat. She spun around facing the judge. "Your Honor, I call my next crucial witness to the stand, Elena Ellison, Senior Forensic Investigator for the United States Treasury Department." The DA was hyperventilating, waving his hands, trying desperately to object, but the judge waved him off aggressively, completely enthralled by the unraveling conspiracy. Elena confidently took the stand, opening her encrypted laptop and swiftly connecting it to the courtroom's main overhead projector screen. "Ms. Ellison?" Maya asked, her demeanor instantly returning to razor-sharp detached professionalism. "Have you analyzed the IP network logs and the offshore banking accounts related to the Bronzeville Orphan Fund?" "I have," Elena stated clearly, her voice echoing with authority. A massive, incredibly complex web of bank transfers, routing numbers, and server pings appeared on the massive screen behind her. The prosecution claims the missing $15 million was routed by Marcus Ellison to the Cayman Islands. This is fundamentally false. While the money was technically routed through a localized router at Mr. Ellison's address to frame him, a Layer 70 packet inspection revealed that the router was accessed remotely via a highly sophisticated spoofed MAC address. Elena confidently tapped a key. The complex web on the screen shifted violently, zooming in past firewalls and proxy servers, landing on a single glowing red node. "I traced the absolute origin of that spoofed connection, overriding the proxy servers. It did not originate in Brownsville. It came from a secure, private fiber optic network located at a penthouse in the Gold Coast, specifically an IP address personally registered and paid for by Rebecca Sloane." Loud gasps filled the room. Several jurors covered their mouths. Rebecca stood up violently, her chair knocking over behind her, her mask of civility completely destroyed. "She's lying. The data is manipulated. This is a setup. She's my estranged family. She has a personal vendetta against me." "Sit down and be quiet, Ms. Sloane," Judge Harrison bellowed, his voice cracking like a whip. "Or I will hold you in contempt right now." Elena wasn't even close to finished. "Furthermore, Your Honor, using my federal clearance, I subpoenaed the actual banking records of the Cayman Islands shell company, Apex Holdings, where the missing money ultimately ended up. The listed beneficiary is a triple-blind corporate trust. I cracked the trust's encryption yesterday afternoon. The sole legal signatory and exclusive beneficiary of the stolen $15 million is Rebecca Sloane. The money was urgently needed and immediately used to cover massive undisclosed illegal debts threatening to bankrupt her Sapphire Spire project." Maya turned back to the stunned jury, laying out the final, undeniable truth. Rebecca Sloane desperately needed Marcus Ellison's land. When he heroically refused to sell his family home, she utilized her corporate resources to frame him for embezzlement, to force him into a federal prison intending to seize his property through civil forfeiture, while simultaneously stealing $15 million to illegally save her failing company. "And there's one more thing," Chloe said, standing up boldly from the front row of the gallery, turning to face the swarm of reporters behind her. "Your Honor, as an investigative journalist for the East Coast Syndicate, I've just clicked publish on a sworn notarized affidavit from Ms. D. Sloane's lead corporate developer. He fully admits to physically planting the forged ledgers in Mr. Ellison's home under cover of darkness on Ms. D. Sloane's direct recorded orders. The full story, complete with audio logs, is live right now on the front page of the Chicago Tribune. The trap had snapped shut with absolute lethal perfection. The prosecution's manufactured case wasn't just dead, it was obliterated. Rebecca Sloan wasn't just caught in a simple lie, she was caught dead to rights in a massive multi-tiered federal crime exposed live in open court by the very nieces she had thrown away to fund her bloody rise to power. Lies! It's all lies! Rebecca shrieked, her pristine hair unraveling, pointing a manicured, trembling finger at Marcus. He's nothing. He's a nobody. He scrubs toilets. Marcus Ellison, the quiet, humble janitor who had endured decades of pain for love, finally stood up. His chains rattled, but his posture was straight. He looked directly at the frantic, ruined billionaire, his deep voice incredibly calm and resonant in the chaotic room. I might be a nobody to you, Marcus said softly, the absolute truth ringing in his words, but I raised 3 somebodies, and they just beat you. The immediate aftermath was swift, legally brutal, and incredibly absolute. Judge Harrison didn't just dismiss the ridiculous charges against Marcus Ellison with extreme prejudice. He instantly issued a federal bench warrant for Rebecca Sloan's arrest right there in the courtroom, before she could even attempt to storm out the mahogany doors she'd so proudly walked through. 2 burly bailiffs grabbed her arms, unceremoniously slapping cold, heavy steel handcuffs over her $thousands designer sleeves. As she was forcefully marched down the center aisle past the blinding flashes of the cameras in the roaring, jeering gallery, she looked completely and utterly broken. The haughty, untouchable queen of Chicago real estate was reduced in minutes to a hyperventilating, disgraced criminal, her empire crumbling before she even reached the elevator. But the crushing weight of karma didn't stop at mere criminal charges, because Maya had brilliantly and legally established on the official court record that Rebecca had stolen the girl's original inheritance to initially build Sloan Enterprises. Elena immediately filed a massive, devastating civil suit. Within 48 hours, federal courts froze every single one of Rebecca's personal and corporate assets. The stock of her company plummeted to zero overnight. Within 6 months of the trial, Rebecca was formally convicted of federal wire fraud, gross perjury, criminal conspiracy, and massive embezzlement. The judge showed no mercy, sentencing her to 25 hard years in federal prison at Danbury, strictly without the possibility of early parole. To satisfy the astronomical civil judgment for the stolen inheritance, plus 20 years of compound interest and punitive damages, Sloan Enterprises was completely liquidated. The massive, soulless glass towers she had built across the city were unceremoniously sold off to competitors at auction. And as for the highly contested land in Bronxville, Maya, Elena, and Chloe pooled their newly reclaimed massive multi-million-dollar fortune. They didn't just save Marcus's humble house, they bought the entire sprawling city block that Rebecca had tried so desperately to bulldoze. But instead of building a sterile, luxury high-rise for the rich, they built something that actually mattered to the world. A year later, on a bright, beautiful summer afternoon, Marcus stood in front of a stunning, newly constructed red brick building. It had huge, welcoming windows, a massive, state-of-the-art playground in the back, and a sprawling, lush community vegetable garden. The large bronze sign above the pristine double doors read, "The Hayes Ellison Center for Fostered Youth." Marcus looked down at his rough hands. They were still deeply calloused. The joints still ached terribly when it rained, but they were no longer chained to a metal table. They were free. Maya walked up and wrapped her arm tightly around his waist, resting her head lovingly on his shoulder. Elena and Chloe stood on his other side, smiling brightly as dozens of laughing children ran past them, filing into the safety and warmth of the new center. "You did good, Dad," Maya whispered, reaching up to kiss his weathered cheek. Marcus smiled, a profound tear of pure joy slipping down his face, catching the sunlight. "No," he replied, squeezing her shoulder tightly, looking at his 3 brilliant daughters. "We did good." What an absolutely incredible, heart-pounding journey of total sacrifice, unyielding resilience, and the ultimate satisfying justice. Marcus Ellison proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that true family isn't defined by blood, but by the endless love, sweat, and tears you pour into those who need you the most. And the ruthless Rebecca Sloan learned the absolute hardest way possible that the dark past you try to bury can grow up, get high-powered law degrees, and completely destroy your empire. Karma truly has a brilliant, funny way of delivering the perfect, inescapable sentence. If this epic story of absolute justice, fierce loyalty, and the unbreakable, beautiful bond between a dedicated father and his brilliant daughters gave you chills, please hit that like button right now. It really helps the channel grow and allows us to keep bringing you more epic, fully detailed tales of satisfying revenge and emotional redemption. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who absolutely loves a masterfully executed plot twist, and subscribe to the channel and turn on all notifications so you never miss out on our daily high drama stories. We want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments below what was your absolute favorite moment of karma in this story. Was it the cross-examination or the final reveal? See you in the next one.